2023 was a banner year for video games. Some might even say it was the best year for gaming that we have ever had. The year gave us incredible titles like The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Baldur's Gate 3, Resident Evil 4 Remake, Spider-Man 2, the list goes on and on. And while that many quality releases meant that gamers were never short on things to play last year, it also meant that many great games were bound to slip between the cracks and not get all of the love and attention that they deserved. For me, there is no better example of this than Star Wars Jedi Survivor. So today, I'm going to talk about why Jedi Survivor is one of the best releases of last year and why it might not have gotten the love it deserved. And, most importantly, why you absolutely need to go back and play this game if you didn't have time in 2023. I'll have plenty of time to gush about what makes Star Wars Jedi Survivor great later on, but for me, the most interesting aspect here is why such a huge game failed to make much of a splash. I want to be clear here, I'm not in any way saying that this game was some sort of flop. It got good reviews, currently sitting at an 85 on Metacritic, and it seemed to be a commercial hit as well for the most part. However, despite all of this, it also seems to be a somewhat forgotten title. The title came and went without too much fanfare, and the game failed to make most publications' Game of the Year lists for 2023. Star Wars is one of the biggest brands in the world, and its prequel Jedi Fallen Order was a commercial and critical success, which made Jedi Survivor one of the most anticipated titles heading into 2023. So why exactly did so many people move on from this game so quickly? Well, the game did unfortunately have a number of bad breaks go its way. The first tough blow here came early in 2023, when EA announced that the hotly anticipated title would be getting pushed back 6 weeks, and rather than release on March 17th, it would be hitting storefronts on April 28th. Initially, this didn't seem like that big of a deal. Games get delayed all the time these days, and 6 weeks typically isn't enough time to kill off all the hype surrounding a game or anything like that. However, maybe we should have taken this as a sign that the game was coming in just a little bit hot. And when I say a little bit hot, I mean the game was coming in steaming hot, like cut you open with a lightsaber hot. When Jedi Survivor dropped, it was impossible to have any conversation about the game without mentioning its technical issues. I remember at the time I had just recently got a new 4K OLED TV, and I could not wait to see how this game looked on it. So imagine my disappointment when I booted it up and discovered that the HDR option was completely broken. The game ran HDR by default, so I watched the entire opening cutscene in essentially smeared black and white color. My dumbass thought it might have been a stylistic choice before I did some Googling and realized I would have to turn off the feature for a normal visual experience. So I had to start my first playthrough with slightly less vivid colors, not the end of the world, but unfortunately, that was only the first thing on a very, very long list of technical issues. Frame rate drops were everywhere, whether you played in visual or performance mode. Many players encountered game-breaking bugs that impeded progress, and while I was fortunate enough to avoid anything that serious, I did have to deal with numerous game crashes. Certain areas on the planet Kobo also had such significant screen tearing at times that I began to question if my new TV was defective. Not a good sign. However, despite all of this, after reading other players' experiences online, it seemed like I was one of the luckier ones in terms of overall glitches encountered. The PC version of the game in particular seemed to be almost unplayable. The bottom line is this game was a mess on release. And while it's in a much better state these days, there is no denying that all the technical issues and bad word of mouth helped kill the hype quite a bit when this game first released. And while the overall state of the game was definitely a detriment to the attention that Jedi Survivor received when it released, it unfortunately had an even bigger hurdle to overcome. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom, quite possibly the most anticipated game of the year, released on May 12th, just a couple of weeks after Jedi Survivor. And this is where the delay from March to the end of April really hurt Cal Kestis and friends. Jedi Survivor is a lengthy game, much bigger than its predecessor, and one that's meant to be played for weeks or even months before your average gamer is able to see everything it has to offer. Tears of the Kingdom releasing so closely on this game's heels unfortunately killed a lot of the longevity that Star Wars Jedi Survivor hoped to have. Speaking from my own personal experience, I was absolutely loving my time with this game, and was looking forward to spending hours upon hours on this adventure, maybe even attempting to 100% it. But of course, those dreams all died on May 12th when Tears of the Kingdom dropped, and I immediately traded in my lightsaber for the Master Sword. I did eventually go back to Star Wars Jedi Survivor and loved spending more time with it, but with the abundance of quality releases throughout all of last year, I didn't return to the game until several months later. How many gamers put the game down when Tears of the Kingdom released and never went back? Probably a fair amount. But those gamers who fell off Jedi Survivor and never returned really missed out, because this truly is a fantastic gaming experience. Let me preface this by saying I'm a huge Star Wars nerd. Always have been, always will be, so I will admit that I was certainly predispositioned to love this game. But if you're a fellow Star Wars lover like me and you still haven't checked this game out, then you need to stop what you're doing and play this game immediately. Seriously, because in my eyes, this is the best Star Wars content that we have gotten in years, maybe decades. Between this game and its prequel, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, it's clear that the team at Respawn understands exactly what makes this franchise great. Cal Kestis and his crew are a lovable, spunky group with a fantastic dynamic that rivals even the OG Star Wars gang of Luke and his friends. Some of the best parts of the game are traveling from planet to planet and just listening to the little bits of dialogue within the crew as they poke fun at one another. Cal's crew feels like a family in all the best ways. But the Star Wars love doesn't end there. Everything in this game, from the huge sweeping landscapes to the epic, joyful music, feel like they would be right at home in any major motion picture Star Wars release. And the story? It's some pretty great Star Wars content as well. It's not going to change your life or anything like that, but it feels like some of the best classic Star Wars adventuring since the original trilogy. There's even some super cool High Republic stuff in there for the real diehards that I was not expecting. But even putting all of the Star Wars love aside, there is still a ton here that makes this a great game on its own merits. Jedi Fallen Order crafted a winning formula that combines Souls-like combat with Metroidvania-like exploration, and its successor expands upon this combination in all the right ways. The combat is very similar to Fallen Order in terms of feel and functionality, but the customization aspects here are so much deeper than before. This time around, there are 5 different fighting stances to pick from. A traditional one-handed lightsaber approach for all of you purists out there, a double-bladed stance akin to Darth Maul, a dual-wield build for people who want fast and frenetic combat, and even a blaster stance for those who want a ranged option in addition to a lightsaber. The 5th option is a crossguard heavy stance that essentially makes the lightsaber feel like a giant claymore. This feels very wrong to me in terms of lore and functionality, but it's still cool to mess around with. Add in the variety of force powers available to the player, and you have a deep system that allows you to mold Cal Kestis into your dream Jedi. Even if you don't care about different Jedi styles in the slightest, the variety of combat options here allow people of all different tastes and preferences to have a good time with this game's combat. And the customization options don't stop there either. While the only visual customization of Cal that Fallen Order allowed was the changing of the main character's signature poncho, Jedi Survivor ramps this aspect up considerably. This time around you can change Cal's pants, shirt, and jacket, which are all good steps in the right direction, but even more importantly, it allows you to change his facial hair and hairstyle. Do you want your Cal to look like a Jedi Master with long flowing hair and a thick beard? Done. Okay, but what if you would rather your Cal look absolutely nothing like a Jedi Master and just travel around the galaxy rocking a handlebar mustache and a mullet? Say no more. Some of the options here are admittedly a little on the goofy side. Yeah, I'm talking about the mullet. And even though some might not look like they necessarily belong anywhere in the Star Wars universe, it's all optional, and more options are never a bad thing in my book. The bottom line is if you're somebody who values customization in their gaming, this game will certainly not disappoint. It's absolutely leaps and bounds above its predecessor in this regard. And while we're on the subject of dwarfing its predecessor, the planets in this game are on a completely different level this time around as well. There are fewer planets to explore here, but that's made up for by the fact that the main planet Kobo is absolutely massive. The hills and vistas here are sprawling and extremely impressive, and many of the visuals on display here are absolutely stunning, now that the game is running properly. You still might have to deal with the occasional screen tear here and there, but when things are running smoothly, which is most of the time now, this game's graphical capabilities are very impressive. Jedi Survivor takes on a much more open world feel, with more side quests and optional activities scattered across its vast worlds, but it also maintains the Metroidvania style exploration that made the first game so beloved. In many ways, it's the best of both worlds. And again, While there are fewer worlds this time around, the ones that are here are fantastic. The aforementioned Koboh is where you'll be spending the most time, but the sprawling sands of the desert planet Jeddah are equally as awe-inspiring, and venturing across the night skyline of Coruscant is a treat for any longtime Star Wars fan. The bigger is better mantra here carries over to other aspects of the game as well. In addition to the fleshed out side missions, there are all sorts of optional activities you can partake in as well, including filling out your Katina, which acts as your central hub, and even building your own personal rooftop garden. Jedi Fallen Order was a fantastic game in its own right, but it did have a somewhat short runtime. Jedi Survivor, though, will have you occupied for north of 50 hours if you want to see everything it has to offer. In a year as packed as 2023, there are bound to be plenty of games that fly under the radar. But to me, no game was more underappreciated last year than Star Wars Jedi Survivor. This is easily one of my favorite games in recent memory. It takes everything its predecessor does and improves upon all of it in meaningful and substantial ways. This game is a must-play for fans of the Star Wars universe. But even if the brand does nothing for you, there is still a fantastic action-adventure game to enjoy here. It's a shame that Star Wars Jedi Survivor flew under the radar a bit because there's just so much to love here. I just hope that the inevitable third game in the saga doesn't release in a year quite as packed as 2023.